Hey, all you rad dads out there.
Well, Abe, thanks for joining me on the Rad Dad Show. This has been a long time in the making. I'm glad we finally made it happen. But I'm going to start the way we always do, and that's by asking, who are you?
Okay. My name's Abe Brennan. I'm an American. I live in Denver, Colorado. I'm a musician for a long time now. I do a bunch of stuff. I play music. I'm an artist. I am a union organizer, and I also do some writing and editing freelance. I just kind of have a lot of irons in the fire of trying to cobble together a living down here. So that's basically what I do. And I'm a dad and a husband also.
And so you have two kids?
I have two kids. Yeah, my daughter Lola is 20. She just turned 20 in November, and my son Dashiell is 16, but he'll be 17 at the end of this month.
Nice. Okay, well, you kind of talked about having a lot of irons in the fire. I mean, maybe we'll get to some of this a little bit later, but you have a lot more irons in the fire than you even did maybe like a year ago. Like, am I characterizing that correctly?
No, that's totally true, and really, like, it's kind of narrowed my focus down because so one I play in a few bands, but one of them, Dead Pioneers, has really just kind of started to do a bunch of stuff and take off, and we just signed with a label out of the UK called Hassle Records, and put out we had self-released our first record. They re-released that, and then we've got another record coming out early next year in April, I think. And so that band had started to pick up and do a bunch of stuff. And then in the midst of all that, all of a sudden I got the opportunity to start singing for RKL also, Rich Kids on LSD. So that there's a bunch of stuff going on with that band also. So all of a sudden, like, I'm doing a ton of music stuff, touring and shows and different things with that, which, I mean, I've played music this whole time, but I haven't been like a serious touring musician in quite a while. So this is going to
Well,
be an adjustment for
well,
sure.
that's what I was going to say is like it's like the opposite trajectory from a lot of, well, I shouldn't say opposite because yeah, you were obviously playing a lot of music before you had kids. And then obviously still playing, but now things are really picking up as you've got, adult kids. So this is a different experience from a lot of musicians who, normally at this point in their lives, like things have really slowed down. How does this all happen? Well, maybe let's talk about the RKL thing. I think people want to hear about that. Like this is pretty new news that you've joined RKL back in November. I think this was announced. So you grew up in California, or you were born in California, right? So is that kind of where this connection starts, or did it kind of happen later?
It happened later. Like, I was born in San Francisco, and I grew up all over Southern and Northern California until the summer before high school, ninth grade. And then my family migrated up to Washington State, outside of a little town called Gig Harbor, which is basically in between Tacoma and Bremerton. But we lived out on the Key Peninsula, which is not Gig Harbor proper by any means. But so yeah, we I moved out there, and so getting into punk rock and stuff, that's where I did it. And
Okay.
but that's where the connection to RKL starts, because a good buddy of mine, Avery Holmes, who's like one of my longtime good best friends, he got me into a ton of different punk rock. Like, he was the guy who had all the records, who made all the comps, who was like, turning people on to stuff and everything. And so I'm pretty sure that's where I first heard RKL. And this was the early Mystic stuff, and
Yep.
which we all loved and were into and stuff like that. But yeah, we were into it then, and then I started playing music, started playing in bands and stuff like that, and then that's basically when Rock and Roll Nightmare came out, which was to me a game changer. Like, I couldn't believe that record. Like, there was stuff on there that we just were like, wow, didn't know punk rock bands could do this.
Yeah.
It just took it up a bunch of levels or whatever, and so super into them. Love that band. And then, my old band, My Name, was supposed to play with them once, and they got bogged down in a snowstorm and didn't make it. They were supposed to come another time. It didn't happen. So it was always like just, hopes raised, hopes dashed for
Yep.
several years there, but then finally saw him in the early 90s or whatever. But so that's when I first got into him. But as far as like, getting to know the guy, I didn't know any of them back then. But it was when my another old band of mine, Wretch Like Me, toured with Lagwagon, and Chris Rest and Dave Ron were in Lagwagon at that time, and so I met those guys then, and they were fans of our band. They took us on tour and did some really cool stuff for us. Played a benefit show for our guitar player Trevor Lanigan, my longtime best friend, who's since passed away.
Yeah.
But when he got brain cancer, they came out here and they played a couple shows and just gave him the money, man. It was amazing. Really, really cool. But anyway, so I met Chris and Dave through that, and got to be friends with them. And then just, that was like 20 years ago or something like that. So I just kind of stayed in touch, especially with Dave. Like I would just, we'd hit each other up and through the social stuff like that. And Wagwagon would come through town and stuff. And then I saw them teasing this RKL thing. They were like, posting footage of playing instrumental RKL songs at practice. And I was kind of like, oh, wow. So I hit him up and was like, hey, if you ever need a singer for that, let me know. And he said they had Tony from Municipal Waste going. So I was like, oh, well, of course you do. Never mind. But,
Yeah.
I think things didn't work out with Tony because of scheduling and whatever, like I think he was like super busy. So I don't know. They hit me up out of the blue and asked if I was still interested. And I was jumped at it. Yeah, absolutely.
Like what a crazy world, whatever, like, 40 years later, 35, 40 years later, like, this band that you looked up to, like now you're in the band. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's wild. It's a kind of a full circle moment, pretty crazy. But yeah, they sent me five songs that they'd recorded a practice
Yeah.
instrumental and just said, "Hey, why don't you lay down vocals on these and let's see, see if it works, see if it's a fit." And I'm lucky because I'm Jason Livermore is one of my best friends at the Blasting Room, so I was
Yep.
just hit him up and was like, "Hey, man, can you help me record vocals on these songs?" And went up there and laid them down, and yeah, from that point they were like, they were into it, so super stoked. But
Oh,
what's weird is like, yeah, technically in the band and everything, but we haven't even practiced yet. Like our first practices are the middle of this month,
yep.
18, 19, and 20. And then the first shows we're going to play are start in late September into early March, run of California shows. And then we've got a Europe tour later in March. But yeah, so it's been a lot of hurry up and wait. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I bet you're anxious to kind of get in the room with the guys, right?
Yeah, yeah, can't wait. It's going to be great.
And
I'll tell
well,
you what though, like it was a trip, like just listening to those songs, especially the demo songs and getting ready to record those songs. Like you said, many of those songs I've been listening to for almost 40 years. And so yeah, that was wild to actually go, okay, well, how am I gonna sing this? Like, because I'm basically like a caretaker of legacy at this
right.
point. You know what I mean? Like you want to put your own style on it or whatever, but you can't do too much. You got to be true to the
Yep.
legacy, to Jason's, what he laid
Yeah.
down, and that's who RKL is. So
Do you
yeah, it
kind of
just worked out.
feel that pressure at all with kind of maintaining that legacy, or do you think, um, like it's not like you're replacing a singer that left last year, and like this band's kind of been on hiatus for quite a while, right? Has broken up
Yeah.
several times over the years, and like it seems to me that people are pretty stoked about this, like pretty stoked that RKL's back in a meaningful way.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I was too. Like when they were doing
Yeah.
the shows with Tony and everything, I was like, oh my God, this is great. I hope they come out, to Colorado. This is fantastic. And I thought about going out to California to catch some of the shows, but it just didn't work out. But yeah, and no, I mean, I don't feel a ton of pressure. Like, obviously, I just want to do good. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? I just want to do it justice. That's what it boils down to. But I've been playing music long enough to where, like I know what I can do. And, after laying down those vocals, my voice sounds close enough,
Yep.
that it does the the old material justice. And then, if we end up, writing any new stuff or whatever, then we can kind of go from there. But as far as like the old stuff goes, like I just feel honored for
Yeah.
one thing, and then also just excited to like play these songs. They're just fantastic songs. Like I love the music, so it's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, that's one thing about, RKL and, like this world of bands that you've been around and bands that you've been in. Well, we talked about this kind of before we got started. Like, my exposure to you, Abe, and was Wretch Like Me and kind of the connection to Descendants through O&O Records and all that stuff. And what I've always liked about the music that you play, and that goes for Dead Pioneers now and Chilton, but Wretch Like Me, My Name is all interesting to listen to. Like that's what I love about a band like All too, right? Is it's just so interesting and so to me it's cool that you like even going back to RKL, you said it too. Like that is a band that there was amazing musicianship in that band, right? Like they were kind of like doing that when no one else was doing that. You had guys that really could play. And so it's cool to me that like you're joining RKL after all this time, but again, it's a band to me that fits within your world. Is that right?
I would say that yeah, that's probably true. In the sense that yeah, they were an adventurous band, right?
Yeah.
They branched out from, I mean, they played, pretty much classic 80s hardcore in the beginning, and they did it
Yep.
really well. And I love that stuff. Rips. Like I've always loved California hardcore, the 80s stuff. Like it just had a certain energy to it. It was, great. But then they took that and went, through a bunch of and it was organic, but you
Yeah.
basically have elements of thrash, metal, rock and roll, and punk all melded into one, all done at breakneck speed. And then you get Rock and Roll Nightmare, like
Yeah.
that album is just insane. So I think, yeah, because the band that I started with, My Name, was, I was a fan of that band before I joined. This seems to be a theme for me, is like I'm a fan of these bands, and then I, managed to blunder my way into them, which
Weasel your
is
way in.
nice. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, My Name was great. When I first saw them, I think I saw the instrumental version first. Then they did a small version with a friend of mine, Rick Levine, singing, and another friend of ours, Scott Shaw, on bass, while Rob wasn't in it for a brief time. I saw them play at parties in Gig Harbor and just thought they were fantastic. Great musicians, the synergy they had together. They made weird music. They were doing like a bunch of, jazz punk, prog, weird stuff, but with a definite punk influence. You could tell that they were punk rockers or whatever. And then that's why all liked them,
Yep.
because they were weird. And I mean, the story that I always hear from Stefan was the first time we played with them was at the Vogue in Seattle, which was this tiny little bar on the wall. When we all started playing there, every single one of us was underage at that time, so we had to wait outside and played. And then sometimes we could, kind of hang out, but a lot of times they would just kick us out right after we were done. But anyway, so all's there. We set up. Our gear is terrible. It's just this garbage gear, and they're looking at it, going, "Oh, great, here we go." And they're getting ready to go eat, and then the dudes start playing. And we used to open with like a few instrumentals first, and then go into the vocal stuff afterwards. And as they were getting ready to walk out the door, they started playing, and they stopped and watched the whole set because those guys were rad. And my singing was terrible back then, but it wasn't bad enough to drive them out of the room. So that's that's good. They stuck around, and then that's what started our relationship with
Relationship.
All. They hit us up to they wanted us to do record a demo for us and stuff like that, and then it went from there to them taking us on tour and producing our records and stuff like that, which was really cool.
Yeah,
But
it's
yeah,
such
so the point that you were making is like these weird bands, this not your beaten path
yep.
of punk rock. It's different kind of stuff, and I think that totally fits because the stuff that we were cutting our teeth on was all the SST stuff, all the alternative tentacle stuff, the touch and go stuff. Like that's the stuff that we like. So there wasn't a defined style. It was all over the place. Like it was rad. The
Yeah, for
attitude was what tied it all together, the punk rock attitude, but the sound and the music was totally different between, Meat Puppets, Husker Du, Minutemen, Dead
yep.
Kennedys, Alice Donut, No Means No, Jesus Lizard, Scratch Acid, Buttle Surfers, like all that stuff was just, that was all punk to us, but it was completely different, just rad.
Yeah,
Black Flag.
and the melodic component too, right? Like that it could be jazzy and it could be dissonant, but also maintain that melodic kind of component. Like it wasn't like totally inaccessible for maybe a non-musical person, right? And so
No,
it's like
totally.
threading a needle that's so hard to do. And I mean, to me, that's like that's what I love about all those bands, right? And what has kind of kept me, I used the word earlier, orbiting around that world, right? Okay, but we're talking about RKL, which is like amazing. But then you've also, okay, Dead Pioneers, you mentioned earlier, is kind of taking off. I think that's kind of putting it mildly. Like you guys just got added to some shows with Pearl Jam.
We did.
Like,
we,
how does
we
that
did. Look,
happen?
this is all our singer Greg Deal, who's been he's a Native American working artist. He's had an art career for the last 20 years. He's certainly nationally renowned, has some international renown. He's had stuff in the Smithsonian. He's done all kinds of stuff. But he's a kid who grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, who was a punk rocker. But kind of on the outside, brown kid in Salt Lake City.
Yep.
That's like, he found community in punk rock and has always listened to it, has always done that. And he had like a performance piece that he was working on that he wanted someone suggest. I can't remember if he thought of it or if someone suggested like, it involved his transition through art and growing up as a punk rock kid in Salt Lake and like all this stuff. And someone was like, you should put a soundtrack to that. You should write some music or whatever. And so that's how he got started with that. And he hooked up with our drummer Shane and our other guitar player Josh, who happened to work at the Music District, the place I was telling you about in
Yeah.
Fort Collins. So they went in there and they did a bunch of stuff and kind of got the ball rolling. And then later at an artist residency in Florida that Greg was at, they had him out there to teach basically. And another guy, Lee Tesh from the band Algiers, he plays guitar in the band Algiers, and he was out there teaching also. And they kind of hooked up and wrote the song Bad Indian and recorded a version of it. And then that just kind of went from there. And so they started putting it together and they were going to record a record. Basically, the four of those guys got together. This was like in the midst of the pandemic and wrote a bunch of songs and we're going to record them at the blasting room. And then Greg got COVID and someone else got COVID and like it just fell apart. And then so they rescheduled for like 6 months later or something like that, getting ready to go in. And then right before that, Josh, there was a family tragedy that his family endured, and so he couldn't do it. So they started calling people, like at first they were like, okay, well, I guess this isn't meant to be. But then they started calling. They called Bill. They called a bunch of people like, hey, do you
Yeah.
want to play guitar on this thing or whatever? And no one could do it. And they finally got around to me, and I listened to it and heard that they were going to cover the Punchline by the Minutemen, and I heard Bad Indian. I was like, fuck yeah, I'll do that. That
Yeah.
sounds great. So went up there, recorded the record, and during that time they were basically like, hey, do you want to be in this band? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So that's how that started. But like Greg, the Pearl Jam thing happened because Jeff Ament, the bass player of Pearl Jam, was a fan of Greg's art before the band ever started. And so he bought a painting from Greg like years ago. And then once he heard that Greg had a band going or whatever, he was like, oh, I want to hear that. And so Greg sent him some stuff. And then he had us out to play the Big Sandy Pig Roast, which is something he does every year through his nonprofit Montana Pool Service, where they go out there and they build skate parks in underprivileged areas. They've done, a
Cool.
few on reservations, a few in just poor neighborhoods and stuff like that. And once they're done building a skate park, they have a big party in Jeff's hometown, which is like, population 300 or whatever. And so yeah, they had us out there. He flew us out there to play that, and it was a ton of fun. Played with his old hardcore band Pest, and a Brit pop cover band that had like Lance Mountain on drums, and like, just a bunch of legendary skateboarders.
Crazy.
And it was, yeah, it was nuts. It was really fun. It was a blast, and everyone was, down to earth and having a good time and stuff. And then I don't know, man. That was that, we
That
thought.
was the
And
job
then,
interview.
yeah, I guess. And then, months later or whatever, they're like, "Hey, you want to open these shows?" So we were like, "Sure,
Incredible.
absolutely."
So you guys must be like, I mean, planning for all that and thinking about what that looks like, because that's a different type of show probably than
That's
you
another
guys
level.
are used to,
That's
right? So
yeah, no, that's another level. Unfortunately, like uh yeah, I mean, like, two of them are at this place called the Hard Rock Live, which is in Hollywood, Florida, and that's like an 8,000 person room, which is going to be the biggest show I've ever played. But then the next two shows are in Atlanta at their, State Farm Arena or whatever, which, that's insane. So,
yeah,
yeah, we need to have a backline. We need, like, if we were lucky in the sense that when Punk and Drublick came through Denver, we played. We
yep,
opened. We were one of the first bands playing there, and RKL's manager Sean Biggs, who is a sound guy extraordinaire, he just hit us up beforehand. I don't even know how he heard of us, but he was like, "Hey, man, do you guys need someone to run your sound?" And we said, "Sure." So he ran it and shot some video while we were doing it. And so as soon as we got this, I just hit Sean up and was like, "Hey, dude, do you want to come do these Pearl Jam shows? Because we
yeah,
don't know what we're doing." And I know he's worked big festivals in Europe and stuff. So he's going to do that, which is awesome.
crazy.
Very helpful.
Well, I'm so stoked for you. Like it seems like there's just so much happening right now. I mean, this is a Rad Dad show, so like we got to talk about your kids and stuff too.
We
So
got to talk about kids. Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
so what do your kids think of all this that's happening right now?
I think they're kind of, I mean, on the one hand, like I've been taking them to shows and, like had them, like you talked about, kids coming to shows and ear protection and stuff. Like, yeah, I was bringing them with, headphone, like the Vic Firth isolation booth,
Yep.
drummers, headphones and stuff to shows that I played or that, other cool bands and stuff for, since they were really little. And so on the one hand, like I think, they've seen me play enough music in enough context that they're kind of like, oh, this is just a continuation. But on the other hand, like this is all, at a higher level, different level. So in that respect, I think they're kind of probably like, oh, wow,
Yeah,
wow, this isn't just a hobby, Dad.
but this is just dad. Like they grew up with dad as a musician and dad playing and music was around and you performing was around as they were growing up. So what I hear you saying is, yeah, it's a, bigger stakes or whatever, but um just the usual.
Yeah, it's not out of left field for them. The I guess the size of the shows and stuff like that are obviously bigger. So that's got to be kind of a trip, but yeah, it's not completely out of nowhere, I guess I would say.
Yeah. So you talked about like bringing your kids along to shows and stuff like that. I don't want to like put an answer in your head here, but we always like to ask, like, do you consider yourself a rad dad?
I mean, my natural inclination is to not take credit for anything. So like, I kind of, but I think like, it depends on how you define rad dad, right?
Well, how do
I
you
think
define it?
like I guess I would say like uh, someone who isn't on their ass all the time and who tries to get them interested in cool stuff, who tries to set an example of like, life doesn't have to be complete drudgery and, tethered to a desk 9 to 5. And in that respect, I would like to think, yeah, sure, I'm a rad dad. I've shown them some cool stuff and tried to get them into various endeavors that are hopefully fulfilling. I just introduced him to a bunch of stuff, different like instruments, different sports, different art, different whatever. Just hope put a bunch of stuff in front of them and hope that they develop a passion and roll with it. And you know, to a large extent, like my son is really into writing. He writes a lot. He also plays drums and plays keyboards and is into music a lot. My daughter, she doesn't play anymore, but I'm trying to get her back into it because she actually started playing drums and was good at it. Like, so I really want her to start playing again, but she's always been creative and done a bunch of art and stuff and has written a little bit too. So yeah, like on the one, you know, you kind of got to temper it, right? Because I don't want them to be starving like I was for, you know, 30 years or whatever. But by the same token, you also don't want them to, you know, just have to grind it out in this economy that we have that
Well,
isn't.
you know what like having like a creative passion, you know what a positive effect that's had on your life, right? So you kind of want to like um make sure to give them that opportunity too. Not necessarily as like a career path or whatever, but just exposure. There's art and music and yeah, you know, writing, literature, all kinds of stuff out there that as parents you know, our kids may not, maybe they get lucky, like, you know, you and I did that, like we had somebody when we were younger to kind of introduce us to, you know, punk rock or whatever, but maybe they don't. And so maybe I don't know, do we kind of take that mantle up a little bit as parents that like, you know, we can gently introduce them to these things that we kind of think are cool and maybe they like it, maybe they don't.
Yeah, no, and you know, they certainly are their own people and they've branched out you know, from the music that I showed them. But I mean, I guess here's the proof is in the pudding, right? Yeah, so if I'm a rad dad, well, both my kids know who the Meat Puppets and Husker Du are. So in my book, that makes me a rad dad.
There you go. I haven't had that answer before, but I think that's pretty fair. Um, you know, I think you kind of talked about like what the definition is of a rad dad too, and you know some of the things you said were like you talked about setting an example for them too, right? And so there's that aspect as well. Like, yeah, we I don't know expose them to things and make sure they can follow their passions and stuff too, but we also want them to turn out decent people. And you talked about like
Yeah.
not kind of getting like you know like not being starving artists, you know, so you want to make sure they have the tools they need to succeed and all those kinds of things. So like how does that fit in like maybe because maybe I'll say it another way. Like I feel like as a dad who I love sitting down with my kids and like looking through my records and like showing them music. And my daughter plays drums as well. I want to talk a little bit more about that, but my 9-year-old plays drums as well. And like I couldn't be happier that she's, you know, she seems kind of excited about it. But at the same time, I'm conscious of like um not just trying to be like acting like their cool older brother rather than their dad, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like you kind of
Yeah,
have
no,
another
I do
role to
know.
play there too. So how does that kind of fit in?
I mean, that's something that I try to figure out. You know what I mean? Like growing up, like I hated doing chores. I hated doing, you know, like I hated all that stuff. But it's very important. You need a work ethic, and you also need to. You don't want to live in a pigsty. So there's a fine line between like, you know, that kind of stuff. And so on that side, I've probably aired on the wrong side of that as far as like developing habits for them to, you know, like you should be getting up at a certain time and you should be keeping your room at a certain level of cleanliness and you should be doing this, you know what I mean? It's more like I wait until it just gets ridiculous and then go in there and make them do it or whatever. But so like I think my wife Nicole and I we make a good team because she is a professional, she's an attorney, she has a career, so she provides that example of like, you know, here's someone who worked really hard, went to school, you know, makes a good living. That has its own drawbacks, right? She doesn't totally love her job by any means. It can be very stressful. It can be whatever. So you got that on the one hand, and then you got me on the other hand of like, you know, trying to pursue things that are fulfilling, that are I don't know. For me, a lot of politics plays into it too, like
Yep.
ideology. You know, like I don't. I think this, I don't know. I'm not a fan of capitalism. I'll put it that way. Um, but, but that's where we live. That's the system we live in. So you got to make your way through it. And you have to come to terms with that. You can't just ignore it. Right. So I'm trying to show them how to make your way through a system like this without, feeling like you're completely selling your soul or getting ground into dust. And by the same token, that's why I had so many irons in the fire, right? Because I wasn't
Yeah.
making a living at music. I wasn't making a living at art only. I wasn't making a living at writing only. You have to make money in a situation like this. But you can also do that without, completely you know, becoming subservient to just making money, basically. So I think between the two examples, I think we can show them stuff. And then also, like, they saw I can't just fuck off and play music all the time, right? I have to make money. I have to do actual work, depending on what's going on. But then also they saw that, I've been doing this now for 40 years or whatever. And then all of a sudden, they say don't quit 5 minutes before the miracle happens. You could say
Right.
like don't quit 35 years before the miracle happens. And it's not even like, I'm not saying the miracle has happened. It's not like I'm making a living at it, at this point, but I'm certainly from a financial perspective, in a position where music is providing way more than it ever has. I'll just put it that way. And hopefully we can parlay this into more and keeping artistic integrity, obviously,
Yeah.
but also maybe actually being able to make a living at it. That's what I've always wanted. When I was, dreaming about this as a teenager of getting into bands and stuff, it wasn't rock star stuff that I thought about. It was just making a living. It was just doing something that you love and that you respect and enjoy, and not having to do something that sucked in order just to get by.
Well, it's a lot
So
easier.
we'll
It's a
see.
lot easier to like put in that hard work, and like it has been hard work over 40 years, right? Like hard work. Because pursuing your passion doesn't mean it's easy. Like when you have a passion for something, it actually is a lot of hard work. Practicing, like you're a guitar player, practicing, dealing with the shitty conditions on the road, sleeping in a van, like all that kind of stuff that you've done over the years, grinding away at various projects and stuff like that. It does pay off, right? And it pays off in lots of different ways. I mean, you're
Well,
obviously you're obviously seeing like a
if
like
nothing, if none of this RKL or Dead Pioneer stuff had happened, I still wouldn't have felt like it was a waste. That's for sure. You know what I
right.
mean? Like it made me who I am. It's like provided me with like, incredible experiences. Like if teenage me looked at all the bands I got to play with and, the musicians I became friends with and just the shows and the tours and all the stuff that I got to do, like, it would have been teenage me would have been like, wow, that's perfect.
Well, yeah,
You
because
made
it's
it. That's
your
great.
your definition of success is like a different when you have a passion, like it's just getting to do that passion, right? And getting to be yourself. And like that's so much of who you are that like I guess what I'm saying is it's neat probably for your kids to see that you've always been this guy, this music guy, right? This has been a huge part of your life. And then, hey, you've got like, we talked about it paying off. Like it's not just about, what's happening with your bands right now, but that like, hey, even this far along, like new opportunities come up and you just never know when that's going to happen, right? And
Yeah, no,
so
you certainly don't.
so
So it is funny, like you get teenage me going like, yeah, you did it. And then but by the same token, adult me who has two kids is like, fuck man, I need to make some money here, like so it's hopefully the two can meld and I can do whatever. I don't know. I look at it like I've always been driven to do like when Wretch Like Me broke up, I stopped playing music for like, I don't know, maybe a year and a half or something like that. And I went back to college. I took a gap decade and then I went back at that point. And and got my undergraduate degree, and then went and got a master's degree in creative writing, another very lucrative field.
Yep.
So threw myself into that and did, got some stuff published, and did a bunch of, that actually provided some skills where I could, work as an editor and work as a, writer, and do stuff like that, and make some money at it. But I did that, and then later on I threw myself into drawing, which I had always wanted to do but didn't feel like I had the talent to do. But then threw myself into, so basically I've been like going, what is the way I can make the least amount of money doing the most things? I think is basically what it's boiled down to.
Well, we haven't even
um
talked about the art stuff too. Like that's something that like you've been sharing a lot of, and you've been doing a lot of. I have one of your pieces. It's behind me here, but it's
I
blurry. But
know
it's
you've
that
got
one
the
of
Stefan, right?
the Stefan. Yeah, I don't know if I could. Maybe I could bring it up to the screen. It'll show it if I put it in front of my face. But yeah, I got the Stefan. I don't know if we can see
Yeah,
it, but from back
uh,
in 2020. Yeah, like it's been neat to follow your progress with that too. Like in your, you can see that it obviously brings you so much joy, and has given you some great opportunities. Like you've done lots of work for Bifocal. You've got some shirts that you've done. Like, so yeah, maybe plug that a little bit too. Like tell us what's happening with that. Like, is that sort of like just a more of a hobby type thing, or?
well, it's kind of interesting. Like, so my wife Nicole and I should say she's actually my girlfriend, because we got divorced like 8 years ago. Or
Oh,
nine, no,
interesting.
it's been 10 years ago. So we got divorced 10 years ago, and then we're apart for 8 years. And So basically she's my ex-wife, new girlfriend, except it's not new anymore. We've been together now for a couple years, and we'll be together forever. But when that happened,
Yeah.
I basically, that was the worst, one of the worst things that's ever happened to me. And it forced me to deal with a bunch of, mental health stuff that I had been avoiding, and a bunch of, just a bunch of stuff basically. And it forced me to grow up also a bit. And In the midst of that, I was kind of going crazy. And so I was casting about for stuff to do, and I'd always wanted to draw. Like I drew a lot as a kid, loved it. My dad and I like drew a comic book together when we were young. He's can draw really well. Nice mug, by the way. uh
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I had to
yeah,
hold it in my
that's a good
right
one.
hand because the
No,
Bill
well,
Bill
but I
once
always
told me
love
don't ever hold it in your left hand because then
when you
the
tip it up. When you tip it up, it's
yeah.
like yeah, that's good. um I love that. I have one of those. Anyway, so like I grew up drawing and loved it, and I wasn't particularly good at it. And then I got into high school, and I saw a kid that I knew was really good. He was one of those natural guys who could draw, in 3D and shading, and like he just was a natural artist or whatever. And so I saw that and was just like, oh well, I obviously suck at this, and so I quit and never drew again after that. But then I remember, like, can't remember exactly when it was, but my dad, once he and my mom got divorced, he before that he had worked for Social Security, and he decided he didn't want to be a bureaucrat for the rest of his life, so he went back to school to become an architect. And through that did a bunch of you got to draw a bunch, you got to do take a bunch of sketching courses, you got to do various things. And so growing up I saw him drawing and he was good at it. And so I remember asking him at one point, like, hey, have you always been good at drawing? And he said, no, I have to work really hard at it. And I don't know, that's stuck in my head. And so when I got divorced, I just got a bunch of books, started looking at a bunch of YouTube tutorials. I checked out, like, probably my biggest art inspirations are Raymond Pettibon and Chris Sherry.
Yeah.
Like those looked at those, and just threw myself into it and started drawing. And if you go back on my Instagram feed to the very beginning, you could see like, wow, you're not very good at this, are you? But like any, it's a learnable skill. I'll just put it that way. And if you put in the hours and the education, I believe anyone can learn how to draw. Now, obviously, some people have talent, and that kicks it up a notch. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I think I have a modicum of talent, enough to where, like, I can do cool stuff. But like, I think Chris Sherry is like, that guy's got natural talent. You know what I mean? And obviously, he's put in the reps and has the education for it. But that guy just people like that are rad. Greg's like that, our Dead Pioneer singer. Like these guys are just they're natural artists. So, but like I have gotten to a point where I can produce some pretty awesome art, and
Yep.
so I like doing that. And during the pandemic, I was on unemployment, so I was just able to sit around, and I just really threw myself into it. And that's when I started like reaching out to bands and going, hey, you want to do these t-shirts or whatever. And I lucked out because Chris hooked me up with Charles Cardello at Bifocal, because I had No Means No
Yep.
illustrations, and so that was my foot through the door, because Charles was a huge No Means No fan and had always wanted to do a shirt with him but could never get in touch with him for some reason. And so I know those guys from playing shows with him back in the day, and My Name and Wretch Like Me and stuff. And so I was able to make that happen, and from there it just kind of grew. So I do shirts when I can. I do art commissions when I
Yep.
can. Like, I was doing a lot more before, but it kind of ebbs and flows, right? Depends on what's going on. So
Yeah, but again, like, it goes back to like just like what we were talking about before. Like you're honing your craft, right? And it's something you enjoy, and so you enjoy learning those techniques, you enjoy doing the research and putting in the reps, like you said. And yeah, it's cool. It is cool to look back actually and see, like, I know you've done some like, I'm trying to think of what it was, like some architectural stuff. You were like posting some studies that you'd done of those, and like, how different that is and the techniques you need to learn to do that, right? Like, it's cool to
I'd like
watch.
to get
Like,
good at that. I'm not good at that, but I would like to get good at that. That's something that really drew me in, as far as checking out. There's an artist in Denver named Paul Heaston, who he's got like 1 million followers on Instagram now. Like he had basically 100,000 when I first started following him. But I've met him before. He's a cool dude. He does like, shows every now and again. But that guy draws cars and houses and stuff like that. And his style is just, it reminds me of Chris Sherry in a way. It's just really organic, really like he gets a lot done just with his line work. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
he just has an eye for reproducing things. And plus he does pen and ink. He does a lot of cross hatching and hatching and stuff, which is
yeah,
the style that I've naturally gravitated towards.
yeah.
But yeah, I would. But what that takes is you got to do your reps, right? So I haven't done my reps on that. So I'll dabble in it here and there. But hopefully one of these days, maybe when I get super old or whatever, I can just sit out on the porch and draw houses all day or something.
Yeah.
That
Well,
would be cool.
it sounds to me like I guess all of this stuff we're talking about, and even you talked about your, I was going to say your wife, your girlfriend. Um
My
like that,
lady.
your significant other, your partner. You're There's a balance there, right? And I think that's like kind of a good metaphor for this whole like discussion about parenting, right? It is about balance, and it's about like we were kind of having a bit of a, maybe getting into a bit of a socialist type of discussion before we got started. And but you rightfully say, like, we live in this like disgustingly capitalist society, and so how can you have that balance, and how can you teach that to your kids, and how can you model that for your kids, and so you do have a bit of that balance even in your household, right? Like, so your wife's an attorney, my wife's actually a lawyer as well, and so
Nice.
I know what that looks like, and I know what my kids see, right? That, like, sometimes staying up super late to work, or like going into the office on the weekend, or whatever needs to happen, right? Prepping for a hearing, or things like that. And so they do see that, and they see that kind of work that goes in, and they see the creative stuff, maybe that I do. And so it sounds like it's kind of a similar dynamic in your house, that your kids are exposed to all that. So, like, what more can we do as parents than kind of model these different things for our kids, right? So they can see what it can really look like.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, if I had it to do over again, there's stuff I would do different. There's stuff I would do better or whatever. But you do what you do. Like I improved on what happened with my parents. I think my parents are fine. Like but they divorced when we were really young, and they didn't know who they were really. I mean, like I look at the difference. Like I had kids when I was in my early to mid 30s. I think maybe Lola was. I think I was maybe 34 when Lola was born. my dad and mom had like they were 23 or something. Like,
Yeah.
dude, I would have been a fucking disaster if I would
Yeah,
have had
me
a kid
too.
at 23. Like it would have been like, it would have been terrible. So just from that standpoint alone, that probably helped him out. But yeah, modeling stuff and like I don't know, I feel good about the fact that like they knew I was into music, right? And they saw that like, oh yeah, he's actually done some stuff that's pretty cool. But then they saw the drawing from the ground up, like I started not being good at drawing and now I'm decent at drawing, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so I feel like modeling something like that, and they saw me put in hours at the table, like just drawing basically. And so hopefully what that teaches them is like, hey man, if you want to be good at something, you gotta you gotta do it.
Yeah.
You got to do it every day for a certain amount of time. But also, by the same token, it's not like I neglected them, or like, blew off a bunch of life responsibilities or whatever. So hopefully that's a balance there and they see that and are able to navigate it. Well, who knows? We'll see.
Well, being a rad dad, I think also takes practice, right? Like none of us really, there's no handbook for it, and none of us really know what to expect. Like taking you back to when Lola was born, like did you have fears about becoming a dad?
Fuck yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally like it was when Nicole and I first got together, like I was completely smitten with her. Like I'm so fortunate to be with her, to have had kids with her, to even have gone through the divorce. We both learned a ton and just, are better for it now. And I she there was a reason why I didn't ask anyone to marry me before her. You know what I mean? Like, and I certainly will not, ask anyone after, unless
Yeah.
it's her again. But like, um, I totally lost my train of thought. What
Well,
what
I was
was the
asking
question?
about fears, whether you had any
Oh yeah,
fears about
fears,
becoming a
fears,
parent.
right, exactly. But when we first were getting together, she mentioned like, yeah, she wanted to have kids eventually, right? And so I had just kind of resigned myself to like, yeah, at some point we're gonna have kids. But I was like trying to put it off for as long as possible. But then we got married, and within the first year, like we didn't mean to, she didn't mean to get pregnant, but she got pregnant, and we just, were like we couldn't believe, we were just like, oh my God, what the fuck are we gonna do? This is horrible. And then, we are like with trepidation, we, approached our parents. We forgot that like getting pregnant is really fantastic news to many people in the
Yeah.
world, including our parents. But I don't know. I guess since I fucked up as a kid so much, I was waiting for them to go, "You idiot," or
Yeah.
whatever. Like, and I think she felt the same way. But they were, of course, delighted. But as soon as she got pregnant, I don't know, a switch flipped, and I was just basically like, "Nah, we got this. We'll do it." But I was afraid. I was afraid of the responsibility. I was
Yeah.
afraid of not having the capacity. Like I had this fear that I wasn't going to have the capacity to love a kid the way that a kid should be loved. Like I just didn't know,
Like,
you
what
have
if I
no
don't love
idea.
this kid?
Yeah. What if, what if I don't have like the innate ability to be like a loving father? You know what I mean? Like that, I had those fears. It was a trip, but then, the second she was born and the second I got her in my hand, like it just all changed. And that's a whole nother, you know, kettle of terrifying fish in that,
Yeah.
all of a sudden you go from like, I don't know if I have the capacity to be a loving father to I can't, if anything were to happen to this person, like it
Yeah.
would just be completely and utterly devastating and like just, it would just, life would be over. And so then you're just like, terrified. But eventually you get a balance there in between
Yeah.
the terror and the love and the fulfillment and stuff. But it's a cliche, but like I honestly feel like my kids are the best thing that ever happened to me. Like it's the most fulfilling. It's the most love I've ever had. I just was having a conversation with Lola the other day where she was like, "Well, surely, you have regrets at times to have us." And I was just like, "Absolutely not. No way. Like this is the best thing that's ever happened, even with, regardless of how hard it gets or what we go through, the tribulations in life we go through. It like I I'm grateful because you wouldn't know, right?
Yeah.
If you didn't do it, you just wouldn't know. you wouldn't know the experience. And I'm sure everyone who doesn't want a kid and who doesn't have a kid, would hear someone say this and go, yeah, good, have at it, buddy. Like,
Yeah.
good for you, pal. And I would have been the same way. I would have been right there saying the exact same
Yeah.
thing. But so it's just interesting that like, and I remember my dad telling me that too at a certain point of like, just that how fulfilling it was and how he felt bad that because I have my sister Elena and I from my dad and my mom, and then they got divorced, and then my dad remarried my stepmom Marilyn, and then I have two sisters and a brother from that, Patrick, Molly, and Katie, and we're all real tight, really close. But those three, none of them are going to have kids. You know what I mean? And I remember my dad telling me, he kind of part of him feels bad that they're not going to experience that or whatever. But you don't know what you don't know, I guess. So.
Yeah, I think that's
Uh,
a thing, right? Like there's really no way to describe to someone who hasn't yet had a child. And it was the same for me. It's funny. I always told my wife and I got married when we were very young. So you talked about like getting married young and not kind of knowing who you are. That was us. Like luckily, and I really do believe it's almost luck that we've managed to stay together since then. Like because we grew up together. Like we got married at 22. And I feel like I was a kid at that time, and I was pretty immature. Like I did some stupid stuff. After that, we grew up together. We went through, the things that you go through as you're becoming an adult. We went through that together. And like I really do consider it to be lucky that we kind of were able to weather that storm. But I always said to my wife, she wanted to have kids, and I always said to her, like, my number of kids I'd like to have is 0 to 1. And I was leaning towards 0, right? Like I'm done school. I have a good job. Like, why would I fuck it up and have a
Why
kid?
would I introduce
Right?
financial instability of a Titanic nature into that situation?
Exactly. And like it's a terrible like I obviously I don't feel that way
Those are the
at
thoughts you
all.
have before you have a kid, though. That's like you don't know any better.
Well,
So
it's the thoughts you have before you make any major decision in your life. Like things are pretty good right now. Like, do I really want to change that? Right? Do I really want to get this new job? Do I really want to, whatever it is, do we want to move? Do we like all these things? And sometimes it's just easier to stay where you are. It's certainly the easier path, but it's not necessarily the more like fruitful path or whatever. And so like I totally relate to your comment that you just don't know what you have until you hold that child in your arms or you see them say their first word or eat their first solid food or like um walk or like all those milestones that you go through all the way up to like coming home with a good test score from school or whatever, like all the things that you experience as a parent that kind of fill you up and make you realize how much you love this person. And I was totally the same way.
absolutely. Yeah, and I feel like I was really lucky too in that just the way that our careers have panned out. Like I was a stay-at-home dad for the first, I don't know, like through elementary school at least. I mean, I was going to school and going to graduate school and stuff like that, and working, out of the house part time here and there and stuff like that. But for the most part, that was my job, was being a stay at home dad, and that was fantastic. Like I look back on those years, and that those are the best years of my life. They were just wonderful. It was crazy. And another interesting thing, like you talk about being 22, like I'm a sober guy too. So like I got sober in my early clean and sober in my early 20s and around 23 or whatever.
Good for
So
you.
that was a whole nother layer of disaster. You know what I mean? Like like I just can't even imagine.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was definitely an immature guy for a long time, and it took a long time for me to grow up. So I'm glad things worked out the way they did
Well, even making
for
that
my kids'
decision
sake.
at 23, like that's a big change for a 23-year-old to make that decision,
Yeah,
right?
back then that was pretty young.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know. I think people are going in at 12 and stuff. Like it's brutal.
Yeah.
You see people. But yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
something else.
W- I'm sort of curious, like, I guess you talked about like, well, I hope I'm not like taking us off on too much of a tangent here, but yeah, I picked up on something that you said before, and it was like, I think it was in the context of your divorce and kind of working on your mental health. And I'm curious about like, um, you're really well spoken, you're really articulate, you're really thoughtful about the way you talk about your kids. Like, what do those conversations look like with your kids? Like, you have adult, more or less, kids now, right? And this is a hard time to be a kid. I feel like it's a hard time to be a young adult with this age of social media, TikTok, um, influencers, like this whole culture that's out there of trying to get as many likes as you can on your posts. Um, like, what do those conversations look like in your household? Has that been a challenge for you guys? Is that like, how do you deal with those kinds of things as a dad, and how do you tie in your own, personal experiences, if you're willing to share? Like,
Well, yeah, no,
yeah,
I tell them like, here's the level of followers and likes you need to get, or you're a total loser. I
yeah,
mean, that's
absolutely.
basically what it boils down to. No, I well, first off, we tried to keep them off social media and phones as long as we could. And it, Lola got the short end of that stick, right? Because with the second kid, it's always like they get to whatever they get to faster.
Yeah,
But I guess what I've tried to tell my kid, and your kids go through stuff, right? And the pandemic and everything was like, talk
yeah,
about,
right.
all the social media stuff, and then like for a year and a half they were at home schooling, and like Lola did okay with that. Like she was able to like navigate that. Dashiell, like both of them are smart and they do well. They get good grades, but Dashiell's the kind of guy that needs to be engaged there. So he was just like letting stuff slide, and we had never had a problem with it before. So we just didn't even realize until all of a sudden, one of his teachers is going, "Yeah, he's failing the class," and we're like,
You're like,
"What?"
what? Yeah,
So anyway, obviously we helped him get that back up, but so it just that whole thing added a whole nother layer, and then you have just I mean, I hope it's late stage capitalism that we're at right now, right? I hope we're going to transition into something better. But we have seen like 55 years of neoliberal policies basically transfer a majority of wealth from the bottom and middle up to the top 1%, and now we're at gilded age levels of wealth inequality again, right? And so you have kids growing up and not having seeing a future that is way bleaker than the one their parents had.
yeah,
The potential for that. So there's that, and then on top of that, you have your genetic legacies, such as they are, that you pass down to your kids for good and for ill. And so, I've had to have those conversations with my kids about like, yeah, man, there's mental health problems on this side of the family. There's alcoholism on this side of the family. There's these there's these issues that you're welcome for that.
yeah,
But like you're gonna have to deal with it. And so you have to like but it can't just be all doom and gloom either. You got to
right.
give them some hope or whatever. And so that's kind of what I hope that we have been able to do, and that I've been able to demonstrate, of like, yeah, this is a tough world to live in, although like comparatively speaking, us in the West here, we've got it pretty easy. And
Yeah,
socioeconomically speaking, you've got it a lot easier than people have had it. I grew up pretty poor because my parents, when they split up, like they just, my dad went back to school. My mom didn't know what she was going to do yet. So by the time they figured it out, put together, good, decent livings or whatever, I was basically out of the house at that point. So, you know, there were some lean years, I'll say it, when I was growing up, which
yeah,
I am glad about actually, because that taught me some stuff. And, like when you grow up with everything, that's one thing I look at my kids, and like,
yeah,
they are not deprived in any way.
yeah,
Yes, they went through a tough time during the divorce, and that sucks for any kid, and no kid should have to go through that. But from a material standpoint, they have been, totally taken care of. And so that's important to to point that out to them also, and to say like it isn't like that for most kids in the world, really. Like,
Yeah.
especially in the global South, like it's not like that. So be grateful, and but by the same token, like just have an awareness of what's going on in the world around you, and act accordingly.
Well, yeah, I think like that's a conversation we have a lot around our house. Like our kids like want for nothing as well. Like, they have everything they need, um and I worry. I mean, they're pretty young still, so it's hard to like, really talk to them about the value of things and stuff like that. But we're trying, because it's like, yeah, if you don't if you don't have that perspective, like I guess I should maybe say it this way. Like my wife and I have had this conversation a few times. We're like, do we have spoiled kids? Are they spoiled
Yeah.
brats? Like we don't want to have that. So it's like, what do we do to make sure that they understand that not everybody has the same privilege that you do, and those types of things, right? So um
Hey, your kids are still at an age where maybe you can pull this off, but I remember there was a Christmas. This was like probably 10 years ago, and I don't know, Lola was complaining about something that she got or something.
yeah.
And so I piled them in the car and we drove down to the Denver Rescue Mission in the square where, like, tons of homeless people were. And I
Yeah.
just kind of was like, hey, there you go. You still want to complain about your gift or whatever? And then drove her
Yeah.
back. That was a good dad moment for me right there. That was a good one.
Totally. Yeah, I'm sure she like that I'm sure that stuck with her, right? And
I hope it
yeah,
did.
yeah, for sure. And that's something, I mean, we've tried to have a conversation about that. We have a our downtown area is really interesting in Edmonton because there's been lots of like development in it, but at the same time, like I think post-pandemic, it's just like it's kind of a ghost town a lot of the time. And so it creates a bit of a, like, for lack of a better way of saying it, like a bit of a scary, feels maybe unsafe, maybe, just like lots of transient folks around. And not that, well, let me finish my point. We've tried to make sure that we show the kids that, like, that we coexist. These are our neighbors. We actually live pretty close to a ravine here too, like to the river valley here in Edmonton. And, we have people, encampments and things like that. And we've really tried to like show our kids that, yeah, these are our neighbors, right? Like they uh but this is how they ended up in this type of situation. We try to introduce them to the concepts of, trauma, or the ways they were raised. And like that's really tough, but is a really important thing for your kids to know and to see, right? Like that like privilege is a it's a real thing, like privilege of wealth, privilege of like where you're born, privilege of not growing up with a ton of trauma, all those kinds of things, right?
Yeah,
You
there's a
talk about like like genetics, like there's like a genetic privilege too. Like, so I'm someone who like to drink socially with my friends. And I've thought a lot about the fact that like I'm lucky that has never become a problem for me. And that's a privilege, right? Because there is a genetic component to some of those things. And so anyway, I'm totally spinning off path here, but I think more than ever it's important for our kids to recognize the privilege that they have in the world, and maybe the privilege that other people have in the world, right? And be able to call that out
Yeah,
too.
no, and like tying it all together too, like that's one thing. So I've gotten into labor organizing in my later years, which like my politics have always been, left, but I didn't really ground them in a material ideology until like the last, I don't know, decade or 5 years or something like that. And uh, and so, all of this stuff is interrelated, right?
Yep.
The policy decisions that get made on a governmental level, that's why we see things the way they are, right?
Yep.
These are decisions that people make. Like right now, right now, both parties in this country are dedicated to letting corporations and rich people amass as much profit as they possibly can, and they'll nibble around the edges of some social programs if you're Democrats, but and then if you're Republicans, you'll like, donate a bunch of money to charity or something like that. But for the most part, it's they're not solving problems. They're just trying to maintain the status quo, so that, the people who have amassed what they've amassed can, keep it and continue to amass it. And so I don't know, like, just explaining this stuff to my kids, showing them through direct action,
Yeah.
explaining to them of why I'm working with some people to try and organize their workplace so that they can, actually get some leverage against management, against their bosses, so that maybe they can, have a little more control over their schedules, over the amount of money they make, over, just the things that make life better to live. You know what I mean? So like all that stuff ties in. And then I think that my art and the music and all the stuff that I do there is, it's a function of all this stuff. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, I think I've instinctively known from the beginning that, this system that we live in sucks. It's unfair to most people.
It's rigged, right?
And I had a I had a very simplified understanding of that in the beginning, which was basically, I want to do something that doesn't suck. I want to have a job that I like, basically. But that's as far as I took it until, you get some education, you start reading, you look at history, you experience life, you see other people experience life, and then all of a sudden, something comes together. So I guess what I'm saying is I feel good about the education that I'm imparting to my kids on not just an intellectual level, but also on a praxis level of, like, here's what you got to do. It's just like, if you want to get good at drawing, you got to draw
Yeah.
every day for a long time. Well, if you want a better world for people to live in, you got to actually do some stuff out there in the real world,
Yeah. Boots on the ground, right?
consistently. Totally.
Yeah. I want to quickly ask you, you've mentioned your dad a couple times, or your parents, but your dad a couple of times. Like, can you tell me a little bit about the relationship with your dad? And a couple of things I'm interested in, like, you obviously have a musical background. Your dad was an artist, but did your dad play music too?
No, no, he never played music, but my uncle, his brother, was a gigging musician.
Okay.
Played piano, played guitar, played in the Bay Area,
Is that where
gigged
your
around in the Bay.
interest in getting into music sort of came from, or where
No,
did that stem from?
I mean, well, one thing that my dad always had, and my stepmom too, for that matter, was a good record collection, a good 60s and 70s record collection of, like, rock and roll and, folk rock and even some country, even, like, Merle Haggard and Waylon
Yep.
Jennings and Willie Nelson, and, like, stuff that I consider to be, really good country.
Yeah.
That's not my favorite genre, but I have certainly grown to appreciate it more. And I grew up listening to that stuff and dug it. But then, and then also all the rock and roll and stuff. And so I definitely heard that growing up, liked it growing up, got into classic rock as a kid, it kind of went from there. And then I can't remember how I got into punk rock, but once I heard that, I was just kind of like, oh, there it is. Yes, this is exactly how I feel. This is, like listening to Damaged and
Yeah.
Circle Jerks, Golden Shower of Hits, and any Dead Kennedys record. You're just kind of like, yeah, this is the real deal here.
And when did you start playing guitar?
Oh, I start. This is another one of those things of, like, well, I obviously suck at that, because I started when I was 15, basically, and I have several best friends that I've grown up with. My best friend Tim Lewis lives in Seattle. We went to high school together. Like, I was friends with him before I was friends with Trevor. Trevor hated me in high school, so that was fun. But anyway, Tim and I started playing guitar at the same time. 15 or 16, and within 6 months he was good, you know what I mean, and I was still, like, hacking away at
Yeah.
fucking Nervous Breakdown or whatever. And which is not to say that Nervous Breakdown is not a fantastic song. Of course it's a fantastic song, and if you play it right with all downstrokes, it's fucking rad. but
Yeah.
um but he was, he was good. He got good. And so I was basically like, and we formed our first band together, and it was with this guy named Scott Schickler, who used to play in a couple bands up in Seattle, one called the Limp Richards that Mark Arm was in. They were like an old punk band that opened
Yeah.
for Black Flag and stuff. And then he also played in a sub pop band called Swallow. And so he was playing drums, and then Tim and I were going to trade off on guitar and singing. But then we got together and practiced, and Scott was like, "Okay, Tim's good at guitar. Why don't you just sing to me?" So that put me on that path. So basically, I just, I've played guitar since then, but I didn't play it much, and I didn't think I was very good at it. Towards the end of the My Name stuff, I started writing songs on guitar and would give them to Trevor, and he'd make them rad. And then at a certain point, I guess when My Name broke up, I wrote a bunch of songs on guitar and bass. And that's how the first Wretch Like Me record came together. And then, but I didn't start actually like going, hey, I could play in a band, until my band Joyce of Attraction started doing stuff. And then that was basically by default. I was hoping to get another guitar player and just sing, but
Yeah.
we could never find a guitar player. So I ended up doing both.
Well,
Hey,
that's
speaking of
crazy.
bands, real
Yeah.
quick, I just want to plug I want to plug Chilton, another
Yeah.
band I play in. That is a fantastic math rock, overdriven, fucking awesome band that I was a fan of before I got into it. Also based out of Brooklyn, New York, and they rule. They've got two records. The first one, Little Birds, Bill Stevenson actually played second guitar on it,
Yeah.
which is rad. Like I love that record. That record is crazy. And then they asked if I wanted to play second guitar on the second record, and so I said of course, and then I play shows with them when I can, but they're playing all the time and stuff. Great band.
Yeah. I love
But yeah,
Chilton,
man,
by the way.
guitar,
Like,
like,
yeah.
oh, good, yeah,
Yeah, I
nice.
have both those records. I mean, I'll be honest, like I became aware when I heard Bill was playing on that first record, right? But I
Well,
have
yeah,
this
as a lot of people,
I supported the second record as well, and have that one
the
as well. I mean,
GoFundMe,
yeah.
nice, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, 10 Canadian dollars, or 50 Canadian dollars is like 10 American dollars or something now. So it probably was a drop in the bucket,
Yeah,
but yeah, happy to help. I love that band.
no, we
And you're a
needed it.
great guitar
We
player, so
definitely
that
needed it.
it's surprising to me the way you
Well,
talk about
see,
your
so
guitar
so
playing.
that's what happened. So then, yeah, so I felt like I suck. This is the same thing as drawing, right? I suck. So, and I had a preconceived notion of what a good guitar player was, right? And I had plenty of examples. I had Trevor, who's like my favorite guitar player of all time. Uh, you know, we're going on tour with All, so I'm watching Stefan every night, going like, well,
Yeah.
that's impossible to play. Like,
Yeah.
and so, but when I started, you know, first off, I didn't think I could play and sing, but it turns out like if you write the riff and you write your vocals around the riff, well, all of a sudden you can play and sing. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And then also, it was the same kind of deal with the drawing. I just started watching YouTube and like, hey, maybe I could learn how to play Beating Around the Bush by AC/DC. And then all of a sudden I play that and it's like, oh, that's rad. Like I can actually play some stuff. So, and then I just practice a whole bunch and, got to be pretty good at guitar.
Yeah.
I'll never be like, speed metal guy who can like is so like Propagandhi. Like you
Yeah.
gotta,
Yeah.
just the rhythms and or RKL for that matter. Like the fucking rhythms that those dudes play at speed are just insane, right? Like I'll never be able to play like that. But I can do a bunch of stuff that's really cool, and I can, the more you play, the better you get. So there's stuff now that I can play that I never would have thought I'd be able to play, like 15 years ago or whatever. So it's pretty cool, and it has been very gratifying to have people like you or like I remember when Joy Subtraction first went out to Kansas City to play, and our buddy Steve Tulpana from Season to Risk put on a show for us. And I remember him saying after we played, he was like, "When the fuck did you get good at guitar?" And I was like, "I don't know," but that felt really good.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool.
Well, it's cool to hear about
Good enough
that.
anyway to fake
Yeah.
it.
Well, I grew up playing guitar. I think I started when I was like 7 or 8 or 9 or something. Like I've been playing for a long time. But I'm a pretty good guitar player, but I'm not like a shredder. I'm never going to be that guy. And I think there's just something in your hands or I don't know, your muscles or I don't know. It's like I never, maybe it's, maybe I'm just, making excuses for how little I practiced on that stuff. but I do think there's like, some of that, it's like some people have it and some people don't. But it's interesting to hear about that. And like,
I don't agree with that. I don't
no,
agree with that at all. I think you can, again, I think you can play your way into being decent because, like, dude, if you would have seen how, when I was playing, like when I first started, like I played guitar in Build a Welder at
yeah,
times, Bugs Band.
yeah,
And that's rock and roll stuff. So that, but if you saw like how I played guitar in that band compared to how I played guitar on the first Joy Subtraction record, you'd be like, it's night and day. Those are two different people. Like,
yeah,
so again, it's like putting in the reps and like also YouTube is a game changer, dude. Like
yeah.
I don't have the ear to figure out stuff the way Trevor used to figure out. Like, and he would figure it out and then play to the record and stuff, and it was cool. But I can't really do that. Now I'm better because I know guitar a little bit better, so sometimes I can figure stuff out. But YouTube was truly a game changer as far as like learning how to do stuff and just getting better at it, and also giving you a little bit of confidence. Like when
Yeah.
you learn a riff or whatever, and you're just like, well, I never would have thought I could play that, so obviously, like I'm better than I thought I was, and then you just keep playing. So I don't know,
Well,
man. I think you could be as good as you want to be. It just and that's not totally true either, because like I said, I'll never be like fucking Kerry King
yep.
of Slayer. Like I'll never. I don't have the dexterity. Like it just doesn't. My hands don't work like that. So in that respect, you're right. But it's like the drawing thing, right? Certain talent, you can take it to a certain level.
Yep.
Some people have more talent, so they take it to a higher level. But I had to become just okay with what I have, which is, I can get to this level, and that's, I got to reconcile myself with that, and that level's pretty rad. So
Well, that's sort of what
that's
I
what you.
mean. But you're right. Like, and talking about propaganda, last year, well, no, a couple of years ago now, I sat down. I was like, this was a pandemic thing. I was like, you know what? What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna figure out how to play all, like, basically the whole Victory Lap record. I fucking love that record. Like, I just love the later propaganda, but I'm gonna figure out how to play that. And so I sat down and like, I got the tabs and stuff like that just to like, how do they do that? Like playing by ear is tough sometimes with crazy riffs like that. But YouTube was the same thing, and I did learn some new techniques. Like you talk about YouTube being a game changer, like some picking techniques that I never picked that way before, but I realized there's way more economical ways of picking and stuff like that. So you're right. Like it is just studying and learning and continuing to hone your craft and not just hope that like the longer I play these same 5 songs, I'm going to get better at guitar, which is
Well, I mean,
probably
you
my
will get better,
problem.
but like, yeah, you definitely have to branch out if you want to expand your skill level and your skill set, I guess,
Yeah.
is what it boils down to.
And
But
so quickly, I took us off track, but I was asking about your dad, and so I wanted to. You mentioned your dad a few
oh
times,
yeah,
so I
yeah.
want to make sure you have an opportunity to, like, one of the things we're interested in this show is like, I guess, how did your dad influence you, and maybe influence you as a parent? Like, is your dad still around? I think you
Yes,
talked
he
about him.
is.
He's still around, right? And so, like, what does that look like now? What do you reflect on your upbringing and your relationship with your dad and like the way you've approached parenting your kids?
Absolutely. Yeah, and for positive and negative examples, right? So
Yep.
uh I love my dad. My dad he was a wonderful dad. Especially like when I was younger. When I became a teenager and kind of, went through adolescence and stuff, that was tougher because we just didn't relate, you know what I mean? I don't think he went through the angst-filled
Yep.
adolescence that I went through. I think adolescence for him was, I'm sure he had his own things or whatever, but it wasn't like if he would have heard punk rock, he probably would have been like, ugh, you know what I mean? Like, but for me, I was like, yes.
This
But
changes everything.
yeah, exactly. So I left the house. I got presented with the opportunity. Like I was given a choice. Like you either put your car keys on the table. This is when I was 18 and had just graduated high school. And my stepmom was like, you either put your car keys on the table or you get out. So I got out. I left home, and then for a few years didn't have a ton of contact with them. I did some. It wasn't like I completely ghosted them or whatever, but definitely. And then when I got sober and stuff, and made some amends to them, and that kind of stuff. And then we started our adult relationship together, which has been good and like interesting. But I would say like the things that I saw from my dad, he was very he was very loving. He's very smart. He read to me a ton when I was a kid. I remember him reading Lord of the Rings to me when I was young, and all
Cool.
kinds of books out loud, me and my sister. So I definitely did that with my kids. That was something that I took from him that was just a joy growing up. And so it's interesting. I said, I grew up, kind of poor, and that is true, but it was educated poor. You know what I mean? So
Yep.
like we were, my parents were the bourgeoisie, but they were just, kind of down on their luck for a while. So I saw that growing up that, doesn't really matter. I mean, it matters, but like, you can still have a rich, fulfilling life, at least intellectually speaking, without like all the creature comforts that my kids certainly enjoy these days.
Yeah.
So that was definitely something. He has an extremely good work ethic, which I wish I had more of. Like real consistent, really dedicated. He's very smart and really well. He just knows a lot. He reads a lot of history. Like I remember playing Trivial Pursuit with him once, like when I was a teenager or whatever, and like he just knew everything, and I was just like, what the fuck? Like, how do you? I don't know any of this stuff. And then I had a kind of come to Jesus moment, like about 5 years ago, where we're playing Trivial Pursuit with Nicole, my lady, and her dad, and some other people, and fucking I knew a ton of stuff. And
Yeah.
the reason for that is my liberal arts education, basically. And so I just
Totally.
realized like my dad had the same thing, big interest in history, big interest in all kinds of stuff. And turns out if you get a good college degree and you're paying attention, you can do well at Trivial Pursuit, apparently. So
So it's not all for nothing.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, and then also he's been an inspiration to me too. Like he and my stepmom just sold everything they own and moved to Spain.
Whoa.
Um, so that's where he's going to live out the rest of his days. They took a look at what's happening here in the States, and they took a look at the healthcare system over there and whatever, and we're like, fuck it, let's get out of here.
Yeah.
So they did that, and then
Cool.
also he's a native Spanish speaker because he was born in Guatemala. My grandmother was she's from Guatemala on the colonial side, not indigenous bourgeoisie down there.
Yeah.
But my grandfather met her when he was auditing a railroad or something, and they met and then moved back up here. So, but for the first few years, my dad was born down there, so he grew up speaking. He was bilingual and speaks like a native Guatemalan anyway, or a a native Spanish speaking
Yeah.
Guatemalan. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Uh, so Spain made sense
Yeah.
because he can get around in the language and stuff like that. But that's inspirational to me. That's really cool. To just like, I mean, it's weird. They sold their land in the Pacific Northwest, so like that's weird to like have that be gone. Just them gone,
Yeah.
basically.
Yep.
Um, but it was enough. It's not like they're rich or anything, but it was enough to put a stake together that the government of Spain would say, okay, you're not destitute. Yes, come on in here and retire. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. And I'm stoked because I have 2 European tours booked for next year. So I'm going to be able to see them, on both of them. So that'll be rad.
Yeah, that's cool. And could be worse than Spain to go visit your family. So,
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I can't wait.
oh, that's awesome. Well, yeah, it's neat to sort of hear that and like through the course of our conversation before I ask you about your dad, you mentioned your dad a few times. So clearly, has had a really positive influence on you. And it's funny, like I think sometimes like I mean we're like putting this up on a podcast, so I know people don't always want to like share like really deeply personal things, but I think one of the reasons we like to ask that question and that I'm really interested to talk about it is like you mentioned, like there's positive and negative things we take from our parents, and I think as we like reflect on ourselves as parents, I think it's important to realize that, right? Like there's definitely things I hope my daughters don't do the same as I do with them, right? Like I think I'm a pretty good dad, but I don't think I'm nailing it every day, right?
No, certainly not.
And I have my issues too, like I have a pretty short temper and again, to like go back to some of those genetics, like my mom had a super short temper, and so it's like how can I recognize these things and maybe try and break the cycle with my kids a little bit,
Yeah,
right?
no, and that, yeah, no, it's totally. And I mean, I'll just tell you one of the negative things, like for my dad growing up, is like I told you we had a rocky time during my
Yeah,
adolescence, and so he's trying to figure that out. I was grounded a lot, uh, which I don't think was like a very effective method of like changing what I was thinking. I remember, I was really into soccer. I played soccer in high school, but then at one point he held me out because I got in trouble. And even he has admitted later, like, well, that was stupid. That was one positive thing you were doing, and I
right.
took it away from you. Like that was like, so that's one thing that I've never. If my kids are involved in something that seems positive, like I don't punish them by taking it away or whatever.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it's like I certainly wasn't as strict as uh, my dad and my stepmom were with me. But I'm probably too lax too. So
Yeah.
maybe the next generation will get it just right.
um Abe, I feel like I've like stolen 2 hours of your afternoon here, but I really do appreciate it. I really, I'm so happy to have you on the show. It's been such a great conversation. I've got like a million more questions for you, so we're gonna have to do a part two. But I want to make sure to come back to what we started talking about at the beginning, and that's all the stuff you have going on. So, let's recap and maybe tell everybody what's going on with Dead Pioneers, what's going on with RKL, where can people find you online, what are you excited about? Like it's January 3rd, we're in 2025. So, what are you excited about for the new year? And yeah, so this is your time to plug all that stuff and make sure people know where
Plug
to
it
find you.
away.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So if we just go by music, I'll just take you through my bands. Joy Subtraction is still a band, but we're kind of on hiatus. Chilton is working on a third record right now.
All right.
I just flew out there. We actually got to open for, oh, here's a plug for a Canadian,
Oh
some
yeah.
Canadians, yeah, which
Yeah.
I know you our guys are but anyway, yeah, Dead Bob just did a US tour, and I actually got to open for him in two different bands, which is hilarious to me.
Right. I
Uh
noticed
so
that. Yeah.
yeah, so I flew out and played with Chilton when we played with them at Bowery Electric in Manhattan, and so Chilton is, doing stuff, playing shows, working on a third. Josh is prolific, the drummer. He like writes a lot of the stuff, and Neil, the guitar player, writes the rest of it. I'll throw in a riff here and there or whatever. And our guitar player, or our bass player is she's awesome too, Dahe. But they have probably enough material for like another two records or whatever. But I'm sure we'll start working on demoing that stuff and recording it. So that's rad. That stuff's going on. And then with Dead Pioneers, yeah, we've got those. We're doing a Pacific Northwest run in February, early February. Playing Astoria, Oregon, Tacoma, Seattle, and then RKL stuff heats up at the end of February with those California dates and stuff, and then Dead Pioneers like doing those Pearl Jam shows in April, and then we're doing a Euro tour in May, and that's crazy. We're actually touring with Propagandhi and Pennywise. That's going to be nuts.
Oh, amazing. Oh, I hadn't realized that.
Yeah, it's
Awesome.
they're calling it the deconstruction tour, I guess. So that's going to be insane.
Killer.
And then with RKL, we're doing those California shows, and then we're doing a Euro run for the second half of March, and then various stuff throughout the rest of the year, as far as like shows and stuff go. So that all that music stuff's fantastic. As far as like the art stuff goes, my Instagram is at abe.brennan. And I post stuff there. And, if people want to go take a look at Bifocal Media, I have probably like 12 shirts there. And some of them are sold out. I think one or two of them are sold out, but a lot of them are still in like, a bunch of different bands like No Means No, Zeke, Heimfire, Good Riddance, Alice Donut. There's just a bunch of like bands that I've been, that have been heroes of mine that I've been really fortunate, Victim's Family, been able to do t-shirts for, which is awesome. And trying to do more art stuff all the time. And yeah, man, as far as I'm trying to think if there's anything else. That's probably it.
Well,
Yeah, the music and art stuff right now.
yeah, needless to say, it's going to be a big year for you, right? And for your family too. And yeah, I'm so stoked. Like it's so neat. Um, just to see like everything that, that you're involved in right now. And I do have to say, Dead Pioneers, we've had a few of Dead Pioneers like indigenous punk rock contemporaries on the show before. So we had members of 1876, we had Iron Tusk, and so it's cool to like that's something we're very interested in here. And like I think the conversation around
Well, you should hit
truth.
Greg up. You Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, like the conversation, I think, around truth and reconciliation, around treatment of Indigenous peoples, like I think that is really interesting here in Alberta and really vibrant in Canada and Alberta and is very different from is to some degree different than what's happening in the United States, right? The approach to
Oh, it's way
Indigenous
different, dude. Like, I
culture
mean,
is
you
very
just
different.
see like at the beginning of any Canadian hockey game, and granted, this is just rhetoric and it's lip service, but it is an acknowledgement. They do the land acknowledgements,
Yeah.
which you would never, or at least I don't think you would ever hear that in the States. I don't know. I've never heard it in the States. So that's one thing that's different for sure.
Well, it's part of like I don't know how familiar you are with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the work that they did in Canada, but part of it was that I can't remember the number of recommendations, but it's like over 100 recommendations of like things that need to happen in order to begin that repair process. And so I know it's something in Rad Dads we're really passionate about too, and we've tried to incorporate that into some of our events. We've done drum circles and things like that. And so it's really cool to follow that band and really cool to follow that work that you're doing because I think the punk
Well,
rock.
I mean, a lot of that is Greg, man. It's been an education for me. I'm happy
Yeah,
to be along for the ride, and I'm happy and it's not just, it's not just Indigenous rights. Obviously, we're a pretty staunch anti-capitalist band.
yeah.
We're political and stuff like that. But yeah, you should have Greg on your show though, because he has 5 kids. So talking about a rad dad.
Yeah, for sure. Hook me up with Greg for sure. It'd be great to have him on the
I
show.
will.
So
I will. I'll do it. I'll do an email chain after I get off here.
that would be awesome. Abe, this has been amazing, and I'm just so stoked for you. And I want to give you a chance. We always like to ask at the end if you have any words of wisdom for any dads out there listening before we wrap it up.
Well, I don't know. I think uh, the biggest one I think is the one that I was talking about with my dad of like, don't punish your kids by taking away positive stuff. Like, you know what I mean? It seems intuitive, like that would be a good thing. Like, okay, this will teach you a lesson or whatever. But honestly, there's better ways to teach a lesson than to take away something that is actually positive, that a kid is passionate about, that they're putting work into. There's better ways to go about it, I guess. That's that. I
Yeah,
think that's the big thing.
I think that's good advice, right? Like I mean, we even see it like, and I said we were going to wrap it up, but we even see it like in our home, like, a couple of times we've like, kids have done something bad. We're like, go to your room. But then we're like, you know what? Do we really want to make their room like the the punishment place? Like, do we like
Right.
it might be more effective to like, have a
Go to the basement.
well, or like it's just a punishment that
I'm
like
kidding.
if you're gonna discipline
Kidding.
or
Don't go
no.
down to the basement.
No, I mean, I'd love if they go down to the basement and clean up. That would be great. But we've talked a lot about like a discipline or punishment that kind of fits the crime or whatever. Like, is there something that we can create a
Oh,
direct kind
dude,
of result?
I'll tell you right now.
Let's
I'll
hear
tell
it.
you right now. This is the best punishment my dad ever came up with. Uh, I stole something when I was a kid, and it was from a family friend, and I'm sure it was just mortifyingly embarrassing for them. Right? Like I
Yeah.
went up there, I just stole this thing. I don't even know why, but of course they found out, and so my dad made me write 5 essays. One on like, and I don't remember all of them, but one was like on Albert Schweitzer, the philanthropic doctor. One was on Mother Teresa. Another one was on like Martin Luther King. Like just these people who sacrificed, their own personal stuff for the betterment of others. And like he fucking made me, like I was like, I don't know, 12 maybe or something like that. He made me fucking look these guys up. No internet back then.
Yeah.
Like, go to the library, asshole, and look this up. And then I want a paragraph on each of these people. And so that was pretty righteous.
That's pretty good. I like that one.
I'll
actually.
never forget that. Like that was, and it also like, of course you're just reading about these selfless people who are like,
Yeah.
helping people out. And then I'm just feeling like an asshole for stealing from a family friend.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. Well, Abe,
Yeah. So lock and load it. Just have it
yeah,
in your repertoire. It's
yeah,
good.
I'll save that one up here. Abe, thanks so much for your time. I
That one,
totally appreciate it. And
that one in the homeless area.
yes,
Those are the two good ones.
right. Yeah, you want to like a little bit of shock for them, right? So,
Yeah, exactly.
but thanks, man. This has been so fun.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. It's been a pleasure. I'm glad we finally got to meet face to face, and
Totally.
hopefully I'll come through Edmonton sometime again.